Gaza, destroying entire neighborhoods amid expectations of an Israeli ground offensive. Amid fears of a wider war erupting, White House National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby said attacks on U.S. interests in the region have increased.
We know Iran continues to support Hamas and Hezbollah. And we know that Iran is closely monitoring these events and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks and spurring on others who may want to exploit the conflict for their own good or for that of Iran. We know Iran's goal is to maintain some level of deniability here, but we're not going to allow them to do that. We also are not going to allow any threat to our interest in the region to go unchallenged.
On Sunday, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke to ABC This Week, saying the United States is boosting its military presence in the Middle East.
Jonathan, as you know, recently we've seen rocket and UAV attacks against bases housing our troops in Iraq and Syria. We're concerned about potential escalation. In fact, what we're seeing is the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region. And because of that, we're going to do what's necessary to make sure that our troops are in the good position. They're protected.
Since the October 7th attack on southern Israel by the Palestinian militant group Hamas, killing more than 1,400 Israelis, Israel's strikes on Gaza have killed at least 5,000 Palestinians. The United Nations and humanitarian groups are calling for a humanitarian pause in the fighting. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller had this to say on Monday.
Any ceasefire would give Hamas the ability to rest, to refit, and to get ready to continue launching terrorist attacks against Israel.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said Monday he believed the group's leaders would back a call for a humanitarian pause to allow aid to enter Gaza. Humanitarian aid continued to trickle into the Gaza Strip as 20 more aid trucks entered. But a lack of fuel for deliveries is threatening to halt the operation, with more than 2 million besieged Palestinians awaiting help. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
Filipino swimmer Ernie Gawilan has bagged the first gold medal for Team Philippines in the 4th Asian Para Games in Hangzhou, China. The 32-year-old Gawilan claims the gold by ruling the men's 400-meter freestyle S7 by clocking 4 minutes and 58.29 seconds today at the Hangzhou Olympic Center Aquatic Arena. Coming in second is To Wei Sung of Singapore with a time of 5 minutes and 12.16 seconds, while China's Huang Xianquan took the bronze. Gawilan earlier bagged the bronze medal in the 200-meter individual medley SM7. During the 2018 edition of the Games held in Indonesia, the Davao City native para swimmer became the first ever Filipino Para Games gold winner when he ruled the 200-meter individual medley SM7 event.
In the meantime, here's a recap of today's lottery draws. For the 2 p.m. draw, the winning numbers are 3, 1, 5 for the 3D Lotto and 517 for 2D Lotto. For the 5 p.m. draw, the lucky numbers for the 3D Lotto are 8, 1, 4, and 16, 8 for 2D Lotto. For the 9 p.m. draw, beginning with the 6D Lotto, the winning numbers are 2, 7, 1, 8, 2, and 6. And for the 3D Lotto, the winning numbers are 2, 6, and 3, while the lucky numbers for the 2D Lotto are 26 and 16 in exact order. For the Ultra Lotto 658 draw with a jackpot prize of 61,709,609 pesos and 80 centavos, the lucky numbers are 6, 25, 30, 31, 7, and 12. For the Super Lotto 649 draw with a jackpot prize of 15,840,000 pesos, the lucky numbers are 26, 32, 16, 28, 7, and 2. For the Lotto 642 draw with a jackpot prize of 18,957,242 pesos and 60 centavos, the lucky numbers are 31, 5, 34, 11, 36, and 20. There are no winners for the Ultra Lotto 658, Super Lotto 649, and Lotto 642 draws. Tonight's mental nourishment comes from Johann Eckhart, also known as Eckhart von Hoschheim or Meister Eckhart, a Dominican theologian and writer considered a symbol of the intellectual spirit of the late Middle Ages. And he once said, "Be willing to be a beginner every single morning." This is true. Every sunset is an opportunity to reset, and every sunrise starts with a brand new perspective. I think no matter how established you believe you are or how far you've come, I think there's always an opportunity for growth, so never limit that. William.
Very well said. I do not know exactly what to add to that, but it's true. Give yourself a new beginning every day, and it's also a way to alleviate the disappointments the day before. It's a fresh new start. So, Monique?
Basically what they both said, just keep an open mind every day to learning new things.
And there are now only 62 days left before Christmas. And so goes PTV News Tonight's roundup of tomorrow's headline stories. I'm Shorms Espina.
I'm Monique Tuzon.
Join us again tomorrow on PTV News Tonight. I am William Theo.
At your service, Pilipinas, USEC Edu Punay po ng Department of Social Welfare and Development. Samahan nyo kami tuwing alas 12 ng tanghali, Lunes hanggang Biyernes, para sa isang bagong Pilipinas ngayon. Dito lang sa PTV.
Susunod na programa ay rated PG. Ito ay nangangailangan ng patnubay at gabay ng magulang para sa mga batang manonood.
Pleasant greetings, y'all. Proud Filipina, Shorms Espina here for today's Inside Story presentation that puts the spotlight on the United Nations Annual General Assembly that held its session on the first week of last month. Amidst the backdrop of the Ukraine-Russia war, major upheavals in African countries, and a series of powerful calamities that have ravaged nations all over as a result of climate change. And world leaders spoke on keeping the faith and focus on the 2030 agenda, despite the headwinds and hassles.
This week on the Inside Story, it's the annual meeting of delegations and heads of state in New York City. What is the United Nations General Assembly? And what are world leaders saying at the summit? We take you inside the massive event and discuss what will come out of it. Now, on the Inside Story, the United Nations General Assembly, Rebuilding Trust.
I'm Jessica Jerit, VOA's Press Freedom Editor here at the UN headquarters with the East River just behind me. This week on The Inside Story, we're at the United Nations General Assembly. Leaders are gathered here to promote the UN Agenda 2030, an ambitious plan to combat poverty and promote peace around the world. With a long-running war in Europe, simmering tensions in Asia, political upheaval in Africa, and a warming planet promoting instability and insecurity, this year's annual event is focused on promoting trust and restoring stability. With conflicts, coups and repressive regimes, there's an urgent need for dialogue and access to credible information. Our White House correspondent, Patsy Widakuswara, starts us off.
Addressing the United Nations General Assembly, President Joe Biden renewed his call for international support for Ukraine.
If we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected? If we allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure?
This is the second year Biden has rallied for Ukraine in front of the world body. But amid global South concerns that Ukraine dominates the meeting at the cost of other challenges, Biden did not mention Russia's invasion until minute 22 of his 27-minute speech. While a majority of countries supported a resolution condemning Russia's invasion last year, many are increasingly concerned about the war's toll on global energy and food prices. There are now growing calls from the global south to fast-track peace negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv.
No, we do not underestimate the difficulties in achieving peace. But no solution will be lasting if it is not based on dialogue. I have reiterated that work needs to be done to create space for negotiations.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made his own appeal in his first in-person appearance at the General Assembly since the invasion.
And it is a clear Russia's attempt to weaponize the food shortage on the global market in exchange for recognition for some, if not all, of the captured territories.
With leaders from China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom skipping the summit, Biden is the only leader of a UN Security Council permanent member attending. He outlined U.S. efforts to mobilize resources for global infrastructure projects, reform international institutions to make them more inclusive, and address other global challenges.
Record-breaking heat waves in the United States and China, wildfires ravaging North America and Southern Europe, a fifth year of drought in the Horn of Africa, tragic flooding in Libya. My heart goes out to the people of Libya that's killed thousands of people. Together, these snapshots tell an urgent story of what awaits us if we fail to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and begin to climate-proof the world.
Activists say more needs to be done as thousands of them march outside, demanding that the Biden administration end new fossil fuel projects. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, New York.
Not all countries have representation, among them Afghanistan. The UN envoy for Afghanistan told the Taliban in June that international recognition is nearly impossible until women are allowed back into society. The situation for Afghan women since the Taliban seized power has been dire, with repressive policies in effect silencing half the population, and with more than 80% of female journalists no longer working. Heather Barr of Human Rights Watch says the international community needs to act for the sake of women everywhere. Here she is from Cape Town, South Africa.
Since the Taliban took over control of the country, we've seen them engaging in all different kinds of human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings, silencing of the media, torture, and many other abuses. But the most significant and the type of abuse that seems to be deepening day by day is their attack on the rights of women and girls. They've stripped women and girls of virtually all of their rights. They started, of course, with banning secondary education. They later banned higher education. They've banned women from most types of employment. They've taken away women's freedom of movement, which blocks them from many other rights, including even something as basic as getting emergency health care. And we see that there are new abuses almost on a daily basis recently. And what's particularly alarming is we don't know what the end point of this is. We don't know how much further they might go in taking away these rights. And it's created a very, very desperate situation for women and girls in the country. The security situation for women and girls now is devastating. One of the first things that the Taliban did was dismantle the entire system that had been put in place to deal with gender-based violence. Shelters, specialized prosecution units, specialized courts, legal services, social services, and the law itself, the 2009 Law on Elimination of Violence Against Women, effectively doesn't exist anymore. The Taliban banned the Ministry of Women's Affairs, they banned the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. They very, very intentionally dismantled all of the protections that existed in the country, and we see the consequences of that in women's daily lives. Human Rights Watch has issued a report last week finding that the Taliban have committed gender persecution in Afghanistan. Gender persecution is a crime within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. So we've called on the International Criminal Court to take action against the Taliban for these abuses in Afghanistan, and that would come in the form of arrest warrants and prosecutions. Over the last 2 years, we've heard a lot from diplomats about how important it is to engage with the Taliban, and there's been an enormous amount of engagement with the Taliban. None of this engagement has produced any changes with regard to human rights. We really believe that if the international community doesn't respond to this women's rights crisis, then that's a problem for women everywhere. That lowers the bar on what's being tolerated on this planet with regard to women's rights, and that's got very dire implications for all of us. And we want the Human Rights Council to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Afghanistan, but also create a new separate UN mechanism to collect and preserve evidence of the crimes that are being committed in Afghanistan so that there can be justice for those crimes. In New York, the Security Council has mandated an assessment of the international response in Afghanistan. That assessment is due by November 17th. That could be a useful tool, but only if it really focuses on human rights and centers the voices and the rights of women and girls. And so we're asking the members of the Security Council to view the result of that assessment through those eyes, about whether it's really upholding human rights. So another thing that the international community can do that they've been failing to do is to make sure that Afghan women are actually full participants in all of the discussions about the future of Afghanistan. We've seen again and again and again that they've been shut out of really critical meetings that have happened and really important discussions. This time, Afghan women have to be there, they have to be at the table.
Russia's war on neighbouring Ukraine is high on the agenda at the UNGA. With Zelensky in New York, Ukrainian journalists are closely following developments. My colleague Christina Casada-Smith spent time with them. Christina, what was your impression of the challenges that journalists face from Ukraine?
Jessica, I had the opportunity to spend the day with Dmitry Anopchenko, the U.S. correspondent for Ukraine's intermediate group here at the UN. We talked about how the war has changed news coverage and what stories he is focused on at the UN.
Even with 5 years' experience as a foreign correspondent, Ukrainian journalist Dmitry Anopchenko says nothing could have prepared him for covering a war in his own country. With President Volodymyr Zelensky addressing the UN General Assembly in person, Anopchenko has a full day of work and a pressing question.
The main question for my audience, for all the Ukrainians, how Zelensky and how the US administration understands the moment when the war will stop. It is what I'm intending to ask President Zelensky and President Biden, if I will have a chance.
The reporter works for Inter TV channel, but since the full invasion, 6 of Ukraine's main broadcasters, including Inter TV channel, have integrated to feed a non-stop news cycle. Back in Kyiv, Editor-in-Chief Victoria Naidionova described their priorities.
Speaking for all journalists is, of course, information verification, to verify information. Wait until final confirmation of any information.
Leading a newsroom at this time is tough.
For me as the editor-in-chief, the biggest challenge is trying to maintain a kind of balance between my duty to preserve the life and health of journalists and at the same time to cover events that are happening on the front line.
Vladislav Polit, who heads international news at the outlet, says Anopchenko plays a crucial role as Washington correspondent.
The reaction to President Zelensky's speech, what do officials think? What do people in America think? How will they react to our president's speech?
But covering the UN General Assembly is just one of many hats Anopchenko wears. The journalist also covers the Pentagon, U.S. State Department, White House, and Congress, and provides an antidote to the flood of Russian propaganda online.
The Russian sources, they try to hide themselves. They are reporting like it's Ukrainian media or some Ukrainian journalists. They are telling our army, our country about Ukraine.
More than a year into the war, Moscow continues to deploy false and misleading information about the conflict, an Atlantic Council report found.
That is why I have to, not the double check, but triple check the information with the sources, with the officials, because I don't have to be like them.
In times of war, Anopchenko knows his reporting comes with extra responsibility.
The government asked people not to post the picture of the results of the bombing, and everyone told, "Okay, we got our rights. We want to post." What happened after that? The Russian military who sent the rockets, they monitored the social media, they saw the result, and they corrected the rockets.
Still, there is one story the Ukrainian journalist is looking forward to covering: the end of the conflict.
Gosh, it will be so emotional. I'm even afraid to think about this. I hope it will be soon. I hope it will be as soon as possible, because everyone, I'll tell you, honestly, we're so tired living every moment and waiting that someone you love will not be alive tomorrow.
Until that moment, Anopchenko will keep doing what he does best, reporting on developments for his audience. Cristina Caicedo-Smith, VOA News, New York.
Thousands of journalists come to New York each September to cover this high-level event. Our Latin American correspondent Celia Mendoza has more on what goes into covering the UNGA.
193 member states, 2 weeks of high-level meetings, and an event that attracts hundreds of journalists from across the world. The annual UN General Assembly brings together some of the most powerful people in the world, and with them, media from their home countries.
The journalists gather here on Press Island, a one-block section outside the New York headquarters.
This year, the UN handled around 3,000 media accreditations from journalists in more than 170 countries. With conflict, climate change, inequality, and the fast rise in artificial intelligence, dignitaries who gather here have plenty to discuss. But what issues are the citizens they represent most focused on?
Bangladeshi people are actually suffering from the corona pandemic, after the corona pandemic and the Ukraine-Russia war. So the price hike. So our Prime Minister appealed the world to richest countries to contribute the developing country and to recover the situation and to stop the war.
In the UN, we are most interested in the topic that is for us the most important. Our president will be here in the United Nations, and he will talk about Kosovo.
The main focus of the media these days are the SDGs and also the Security Council's work on the conflicts of international matters, especially Ukraine, let's say Libya, Syria, and Yemen. And I think that the work of the UN that do, especially during this week, is very important, because not only they are here to try to mediate between conflicts, but also to expose these problems and try to have more and more people interested on them.
Ensuring media access reflects the United Nations commitment to press freedom, which is enshrined in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 19 says, everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been a vocal defender of press freedom, saying on World Press Freedom Day,
"Freedom of the press is the foundation of democracy and justice. It gives all of us the facts we need to shape opinions and speak truth to power."
But Guterres also warns of the threat to that right